Is Pope Leo Francis 2.0? There are emerging indicators this week at a huge synodal gathering and an interreligious meeting. The Prayerful Posse will explore it all next. Welcome to an important Prayerful Posse. Be sure to go subscribe to the show. It's a wonderful way to support our work, totally free, or visit RaymondArroyo.com. Let's convene the Prayerful Posse. Canon lawyer, priest of the Archdiocese of New York, Father Gerald Murray, and editor-in-chief of thecatholicthing.org, Robert Royal, who's joining us today from Rome. Thanks for staying up for us, Bob. We've gotten this question again and again and again. Is Pope Leo Francis 2.0? And I think the answer to that, or at least pieces of the mosaic of that answer, are beginning to emerge. Here's what Pope Leo said back in September to Elise Allen, quote, "I hope to continue in the footsteps of Francis, including appointing women to some leadership roles at different levels of the church's life." Are sexual quotas the new goal for the church, Bob?
Yeah, I find this kind of approach to things disturbing because it's more of a political and secular vision of what constitutes a proper personnel profile in the Vatican. Look, what we know even in the secular world is we want the best people in the jobs. And if they're male or female, that's fine. There's also the question, I'll leave this to Father Murray, of course, because he's the canonist, but there's also the question of there are certain roles that can only or should only be played by people who are ordained in the hierarchy. And if what we're pointing to by that kind of political language is a more democratic church, we're already in a church that doesn't have a great deal of authority in the world. And so I worry about it internally for the church, but I worry about it also for what the image it presents to the church, to the world at large.
Father, one of the hallmarks of Pope Francis, I think probably his continuing legacy, is really this idea of synodality. And Pope Leo spoke to what's being billed as a jubilee of synodal teams and participatory bodies. These are essentially people that sit around tables plotting the future of the church. They're listening, they're building bridges. The Pope says it's a way of being church, a way of witnessing to the gospel. He also said something that leapt out at me to this gathering in Paul VI Hall at the Vatican. He said, being a synodal church is recognizing that truth is not possessed but sought together, allowing ourselves to be guided by a restless heart in love with love. End quote. Your reaction, Father?
Well, restless hearts do search for the truth. But Jesus revealed, I am the way, the truth, and the life. So when you find Jesus and his teaching, then your heart is at rest. Now, ultimate rest only comes in heaven. Yeah. But the idea that we're all seekers for truth, this reminds me of, something like from a 60s movie in which people are wandering through deserts and saying, where's the truth? Where's the truth? And then you come upon a guru, and the guru says, the search is the truth. No. The truth is the knowledge of reality, heavenly and earthly, and we possess that. So, there's a skeptical element in modern thinking, which basically says it's an act of pride to say that you know something to be true. And I reject that, of course, so does the church, because that's not how God made it, and that's not how we live.
Well, Bob, it is true. The truth is not possessed by any one person, but the church has always claimed that it is the repository of the truth, which is Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I have to say, when I heard that remark, I was upset initially, too. But I said to myself, if I was writing that speech, I would have taken a slightly different approach, because we have heard Leo affirm, for example, to the international community, when he met with representatives of the international community back in May, that truth is very important, that there cannot be peace without truth in the world. And so I think what he was trying to do here is actually an Augustinian and a broadly Catholic thing by saying, that we are converted, and then we are on our path where we should draw closer and closer to Christ every day in what we're trying to do. the double problem, it seems to me for him, is these sorts of statements get read in the afterlight of Francis, who I think had a different view, had a much more radical view than what Leo seems to have. And the language here, which is Augustinian, it's St. Augustine who says, our hearts are restless until they rest in you. And Augustine is not a relativist at all.
Yeah.
If Pope Leo had asked me to write that speech, and I don't expect that he will, I think what I would have said to him is, look, Holy Father, let us say, of course, the Church possesses the foundational truths that she has received from God through revelation, the Trinity, Jesus, true God and true man, et cetera, et cetera. But even though we have those truths, we can come closer and closer to them by interacting with one another and discussing it. That would have been the way to avoid the impression that he gave. And a lot of people liked that impression, that there is no truth and we're all just seekers, as Father says, that the journey is more valuable than the goal,
Yeah, in love with love. It reminded me of that old Jerry Herman song, Love is Only Love. It's like, well, what is that? I mean, it starts to lose its context as you repeat it and think about it. But Bob, he said something else about formation, Pope Leo did. Listen to this. We're going to play it for you.
And I think we have to be very clear and sincere about the importance of formation on every level. Sometimes ready answers are given without the proper necessary preparation to arrive at the conclusion that maybe some of us have already drawn, but others are not ready to or capable to understand. And without the proper formation on every level, in schools, seminaries, there are going to be resistances and a lack of understanding.
What does he mean by formation, Bob, there? And accepting, some people not prepared to accept, I imagine, the changes proposed by Synodality and these small table groups.
Well, that's one way it could go. I mean, there is a more traditional way to read that, and that is to say that you have to kind of lead people to recognize the truth and to see how it exists in their own life. But see, I think that was another word salad that confuses more than it corrects. Yeah, of course you have to approach people where they are. I hope that that's what he was trying to get at in that, and that every single area that we're trying to teach people about the faith needs to be better at making sure it understands who it's speaking to. But at the same time, we can't be constantly worried about the fact that, we've got to carry out some esoteric operation. We present the truth. If people ask us what that means or they react to it, we can then go on to explain more. But if there has been one constant problem in the Church since Vatican II, with possibly the exception of John Paul II, it's been a reluctant to actually affirm what the truths are that the Church believes in. And I can't imagine that anybody thinks that we're back in some mythical time like the 1950s where you just tell people this is the truth and that's that. It's a different world than the one that he seems to be speaking to.
Father, what was your take on that? I mean, he does say you need formation in schools and seminaries because there's going to be resistances and a lack of understanding. How do you interpret that?
Yeah, no, the key word there is resistance, because it implies that there is an unreasonable refusal of agreement to what is being proposed. And the way you overcome that is more education. Well, that sounds like communist re-education, to be honest. I would have preferred if he said, we have to engage with people who disagree with some of the conclusions that Synodal way is drawing. That's the more Catholic way to do it. I know what's going on here because we've seen it over the course of the two synods on synodality.
Yeah.
People who are enthusiastic about the process control it, and they put out documents, and when there's not acclamation of it, they get upset. And instead of saying, well, other people have not been convinced by our arguments, they basically say, these are obscurantists or ignorant people. They need more formation. That's what worries me about that.
Yeah, that's sort of how I interpreted it. When I first read it, I thought, oh, formation. Everybody, we all need more formation in the truths of the faith, what the doctors of the church taught, what Catholic doctrine has always carried through time, the practices of the church. But I agree with you. I'm not sure that's what he's saying here. It sounds like you need to be formed in the new pathway, the new synodal path. And if you're not on that path, well, then somehow you're holding us back. You're not loving. Sister Natalie Beckwart, who I guess she's head of this Synodal Secretariat, which is an ongoing office in Rome, by the way. She tweeted this out. I'm going to put it up on the screen. Good news from our Synod Secretariat. The implementation of synodality is taking place all over the world. Father, what does that mean, eh? And this looks like a group of kind of middle-aged bureaucrats or retired academics sitting around in a Vatican office to me.
Well, I'll be a little bit tart and pungent here. If this good news was already known, she wouldn't have to tweet it out. Nobody knows that the synodal process is being continued throughout the world except the people running it. Yeah. I have parishioners. No one has asked me so far in the year and few months that I've been here, how's the synodal process going? We don't care. There is no synodal process except what the people in Rome determine it to be. So this is why the enthusiasm here is the enthusiasm of a cadre of people in control who are basically pushing this. And Pope Francis was the one who started it. Pope Leo says he wants to continue it. But we ought to step back and say, what hierarchy in the world sat down and said at the conclusion of the synod, this thing should continue because we're dissatisfied with the fact that nothing has happened and we need more things to happen. Most of the hierarchy was basically silent about synodality because it has no popular support in their diocese. That's how I see it. I'll be accused of being, an enemy of synodality. No, I'm a critic of something that nobody understands except the people in charge, and they're using it to promote their agenda. That's my criticism.
Well, Bob, I'll be fully candid here. My problem with synodality is it's an innovation. Synodality, I was in Rome recently, and there was a synod of Armenian bishops, okay? That's what a synodal way is. A synod is a group of bishops coming together with the Pope, having a conversation about what's happening in their dioceses so they can inform him and together discern the best path forward. But Pope Francis kind of created this, it's almost like a Rotary Club approach to the church, where everybody's welcome, where we can invite people in, and we'll all kind of become little quasi-bishops and mouth off on what we think the church should, the direction it should go in. But as Father said, it's kind of captured by a certain bureaucratic mindset and a type of individual. You don't see Latin Mass adherents or young people going to this thing, or nuns, Dominican nuns in their full habit who've taught kids all day going and sitting around the table. It's a select group, and that's what I don't like about it. It's very elite. Your reaction, Bob?
Yeah, my reaction was somewhat similar to Father's, although I may not be as eloquent about it. I thought when I saw this that they got in some reports from somebody in far-flung places, and they said, well, hey, it's all over the world that this is going on. Look, where is the synod energetic? In Germany, where, it's heterodoxy that they're promoting, and they're going at it whole hog. They're not trying to avoid saying what they're doing. They're doing it. Yeah. Other than that, there are places like in the United States where there is some sympathy in a bishop or a cardinal here and there. But do we really feel in the United States that's where the growing end of Christianity is in our time, in our country, or in Latin America or in Europe? It just seems to me that what they've tried to do with this, which is in itself could be harmless, talking with one another. What they really have in mind is, you're right to say, Raymond, some agenda that no one else can see, but that they can proclaim is actually going forward. And to me, since I don't really understand what synodality is, and I don't know that anybody does other than conversations, when you don't know what's going on, how can you judge whether it's being successful or not and where it's headed?
Well, even this week, the Pope was straining in his first Q&A. You all watched that, as I did. The Pope kind of strains to define what it is by just quoting bromides from Pope Francis. We're building bridges. Well, we're a listening church now. We're walking together. Well, okay, but what does that say to the people in Sudan or Nigeria who are literally martyrs for the faith? That, to me, seems the future of the church, not whatever we're doing around small groups in Rome. But I need to move on because it was a wild week in many ways to my eye. And Bob, I'm kind of glad you're in Rome. Maybe you'll be a calming influence. There was a celebration of the 60th anniversary of Nostra Aetate, which was a document on the church's relationship with non-Christian religions. Well, the celebration in Paul VI Hall began with, to my eye, looked like a Mardi Gras-like parade of rituals and quasi-pagan celebrations, which you can see. It ended with a round of, and I wish I were making this up, "We are the world." Tell me about the visuals here, which I always say, and you all have heard this so many times, practice, to my eye, is more important than doctrine, because the public doesn't read doctrine, but they see this. Father, what are they seeing here?
Well, what they're seeing here is that the Pope and the Roman Church consider it's their job to convoke representatives of all the religions of the world together. And the fact that they agree to come to Rome and be with the Pope is a sign that, in fact, now we have a new harmony and that everyone is seeking the same thing and that we're all praying together and all the rest. And the answer that people scratch their head then when they say, no, wait a minute. I thought our goal was to preach the gospel so that the people who believe in other religions would join us in believing in Christ. And that is, of course, that's the truth. Go out to all the world, baptize all nations, teach them to observe everything I've commanded you. That's the mission. Now, the goal of the Second Vatican Council was good. There should be mutual understanding to avoid hatreds and warfare and unfair treatment and all the rest. But the Second Vatican Council never said, we are not interested in the conversion of people from other religions. Now, there are some people now in the Catholic Church who make that statement, which is completely horrendous to say. But events like this, as you say, they give an impression that the Catholic Church, instead of wanting to convert people, simply wants to convoke them to a meeting, and we can all say we're doing the same thing. People who are polytheists do not believe in one God. They're in the darkness of the error that there are multiple gods. We should never give the impression that we confirm them in that belief. The Pope isn't doing that, but the impression is given, and that has to be dealt with.
Yeah, Bob, Father, I think, is right here. There is the impression that Rome in some way is blessing, the Hindu people with their multiple gods, and some of these far-flung religions that were welcomed this week in the name of peace. And I'm going to get to a quote about peace in a moment. But your general reaction to the visual impression this gives, because remember, we're in a soundbite TikTok culture. They're seeing little images of this, and the Pope embracing it or lighting a candle with the people who are, putting the evil eye on their face or doing wild, gyrations on the floor of Paul VI Hall.
Yeah, I mean, some of those exotic dancers and whatnot, I mean, that really threw me for a loop when I saw it. Look, even back in the 1960s, during Vatican II, when this document was being debated, there were two things that some of the critics warned about, and they have technical terms. One is indifferentism, as if it doesn't matter which religion you follow, and the other is universalism, as if everybody is basically okay. And when I first saw this, it reminded me of Pope Francis going to Abu Dhabi, signing that Abu Dhabi Declaration, and saying, "Well, God has willed a multiplicity of religions," and even his own theologians said, "Well, wait a minute, no, God." We believe as Catholics that God will there to be one true faith. He wants everyone to belong to the Catholic faith. And so the Pope was forced to back off and say, well, it's his passive will. He allows there to be other religions. But what's happening here is what? I mean, there isn't even unity in the Catholic Church in the sense of total peace. The Orthodox are all fighting with one another. The Anglicans are undergoing a split because of doctrinal and moral questions. I mean, let alone, and that's within Christianity, let alone what is outside with these other faiths. So it's a sentimental approach. It's nice to try to be to be friendly with people. But I just came upon, as I was flying over here last night, a line from Cardinal Newman, who will be declared a doctor of the church tomorrow on Saturday. Mm-hmm. He said, holiness before peace. That holiness is what we need to pursue before we even think about our own personal peace or peace in the world. He doesn't mean to exclude the question of peace. What he's just saying is that the real focus for all of us is to follow Christ. And if we do that, then insofar as this can happen in a fallen world, we'll get around to peace in the world, peace in our own hearts. But without that primary focus, this could be the Super Bowl. I mean, it's the halftime show at the Super Bowl.
Yeah. I'd like to buy the world a Coke in the VIP room at Paul VI Hall with the belly dancers. But at the International Meeting of Peace at the Colosseum, the Pope said, "War is never holy, Father. Only peace is holy." Is it?
Well, war in and of itself can be an instrument of justice, as a just war. And if someone invades my country and wants to kidnap all my citizens and is going to kill every member of the army, we fight back because we don't want that to happen. And that's a holy duty. I mean, to love of neighbor, sad to say, in a fallen world, includes taking up the sword in order to defend the innocent. So it's true, war should be avoided at all costs. But there is, to simply say peace is the only expression of justice. Peace is a fruit of a just order. And when a just order is offended, you have to reestablish justice. Think about the people of South Korea. Was it unholy of them to fight back against the North and then the communist Chinese? No, they were defending their land. They were defending their people. So that's a just struggle.
Well, Bob, this brings up the question of historically the Battle of Lepanto. The Crusades launched to preserve the Holy Land, or Spain. I mean, were those not good endeavors?
Yeah, I mentioned before that we believe in just war theory. We don't believe in just peace. Peace as a goal can be a very deceptive thing. And when I saw the remark that there are no just wars, just peace. There are no holy wars.
Right.
Just
only peace is holy.
Peace. Yeah. Look, he's worried about Islam, because Islam does believe in holy wars. We kind of talked about holy wars during the Crusades because we were responding to an aggression by a different religion. And in the modern world, we're seeing, you mentioned earlier, Raymond, Sudan and Nigeria, we're seeing militant attacks upon our Christian people. Also in places like China, a little bit more subtle, but still, it's there. And, a peaceful resistance is a good thing, but at a certain point, like having a police force, like having an army, it just makes sense. It's just prudent and intelligent and human and Christian to say you have to defend innocents from people who mean them harm. Yeah. So there are, I don't want to say necessarily holy wars, but they kind of shade from being just into holy when it's a defense of holy things. I'm happy that, for example, a lot of churches around the world are now recognizing they need to police their boundaries, because a lot of people tend to want to do ill to them. And, as you know, I wrote the recent book on the martyrs in Nigeria and some other places, in the Muslim world in particular. And by the way, I think that this is a sticking point in the Vatican, that it's hard for us who believe in the West, in pluralism, in religion, and in society, we all want to get along, that it's hard for us to recognize that Islam does believe in conquest. It believes in evangelizing through conquest. People have had the gun put to their head and say, become a Muslim or die, and very often they die. So there's an asymmetry here that we want to be aware of. We don't want to encourage holy wars, but we have to recognize that when we're under attack, there is a certain moral, I would even say duty, maybe even a certain spirituality, to being willing to put yourself in harm's way to protect innocent people.
Well, and look, I was with a group of young guys and recently married people last week in Texas, And there was a sense that they're looking for a robust kind of manly spirituality, if you will. Now, that doesn't mean you have to, come with your guns to mass and swords, but it means recognizing reality and the spiritual response to it. And I think that's what you're talking to, Bob. And Father, there is this accommodation within the Vatican today, an unwillingness to acknowledge reality, which is Islam is ascendant and willing to kill your people to gain land, territory, and adherence, and in a place like China that uses the government force and the government boot to smash and destroy the faithful. Those two realities, I think, the Vatican, for whatever reason, they just want to turn a blind eye to and have these interreligious gatherings and light candles and have, dances up the aisles and think this is somehow an answer. Is it?
Symbolic performance type events, as we saw in the Paul VI audience hall, are largely meaningless except as public relation statements of attitude, that the attitude of the Catholic Church is we get along with everybody else. Well, that's a very good attitude to maintain. But when you have other people attacking and killing your people, you have to say, we didn't create the enemy. The enemy created itself by its beliefs. And then they're using violence to try and suppress us. And we're not going to let that happen. So I'm very proud to say that in the Catholic Church, just war teaching does not legitimate hatred. No, it's an expression of love and the enforcement of justice through force in order to guarantee the rights of innocent people. The North Korean, back to that analogy because it's very vivid, the North Koreans wanted to exterminate every South Korean who didn't submit to them. Was it unjust for the Americans to go there and say, no, we're going to defend South Korea and the right of those people? And the government there still wants to invade the South. So it's very just that the Americans have Marines and soldiers in Korea to protect the peace. They are not haters. They have an expression of love.
And look, the last pope that recognized reality, and I would argue confronted it head on, theologically, historically, was Benedict XVI in Regensburg, when he said, this is what we're dealing with. Here's the reality of Islam. In fact, I'm going to quote, using the sword to make converts, and this is a problem for us in the modern world and in the church. We have not had a pope really since then willing to confront in that way. And that opened up a series of very serious Muslim and Catholic dialogues that should have continued. And there was this accommodation and kind of, well, we'll just all get along and pretend it's not happening idea that followed Benedict. But I guess emblematic of that is this Muslim prayer room at the Vatican Library that's continuing to cause a stir. For those who don't know, I guess some Muslim scholars were asking to pray as they were doing research, and the Vatican said, sure, here's a prayer room. They put a carpet in there for them so they could pray. Swiss Bishop Marian Elegante told LifeSite this week, quote, as soon as a Muslim prays there, somehow in the minds of the faithful, I'm not entirely sure about this, but it wouldn't surprise me if then it becomes kind of a rooting and foothold, an outpost of the coming dominance that Islam naturally always strives for. Islam wants absolute dominance. It has caused Christianity to disappear everywhere. Bishop Elegante said, conversely, one would never allow us to set up a chapel in Mecca, the holy site of Islam itself, where we could celebrate Holy Mass. Sounds like something we said on the Posse here several weeks ago, gents. Then Cardinal Gerhard Mueller, the former head of the doctrinal office of the Vatican, told me this week he wonders if any cardinals in the Curia or the Pope himself was consulted about this decision. Then he added this.
How do you think that's perceived by those in Islam and by Muslim believers?
No, they will triumph, and they will have a footstep inside the Catholic Church, and they will interpret it as a sign that we accept their superiority.
Father, your reaction?
No, I agree with both of those cardinals, and this was a misplaced attempt to show sympathy and accommodation to Muslim scholars, but it was a terrible mistake. And, just on as I said in earlier programs, that's a library. That's not a chapel. If you want to go pray, go to a Muslim chapel or a mosque, or pray outdoors, as I see Muslim people do that in New York all the time.
Yeah.
But to give them a place within the Vatican gives them the impression that you're surrendering to them part of the Vatican, which now becomes a Muslim prayer room. And, I believe in freedom. Muslim prayer rooms are great. We don't supply them. They supply their own prayer rooms. And then as regards the other point that Cardinal Muller is making, yes, this is an aggressive religion in the sense that Muhammad sent out armies to promote it. So aggressiveness is inherent in its DNA. We have to keep that in mind when people ask us to do things for them, and we should say, no, wait a minute. We're promoting a different religion here. We want to live at peace with you, but we're not going to give you our space to become your space.
Bob, we're going back again to this, the posture of a church spiritually, A, and B, reciprocity, which there never is with Islam. Certainly not on this point.
Yeah, I've traveled quite a bit in the Middle East, and there are several countries. I remember being in the the Vatican embassy in Tehran, for example, and they do have a mass inside the embassy there. But I was talking with a young priest, and he said, I would love to be able to take a mass just outside here and be able to say mass in Iran freely, the way people can in most countries in the world. The bishop says he's uncertain whether his judgment about this being a conquest is true. I'm not uncertain at all. I mean, I'm quite certain that our people meant well. They did what they did on the basis of Christian values, of respecting other persons as having human dignity. But within Islam, it means something quite different. I mean, you see these cases, we're not talking in sacred spaces, but you see these cases in England where huge numbers of Muslims bow down in the middle of the street and take over a street temporarily to pray at one of the set times to pray. What is that about? It's not about praying, because you can go pray in your mosque or in some space that you all gather in. It's about taking over the society. And it's not every Muslim. The question always comes up when this debate starts, well, we believe in freedom, as Father says, and most Muslims are peaceful. And yeah, they are individually, and they may be good citizens in a certain sense. But the overall historical arc here is something that we're forgetting. And the internal dynamic of Islam, which spread by the sword. Let's be clear about this. It spread by the sword in the Middle East, in North Africa. It went halfway up into Spain and almost into France, almost conquered all of Europe.
Right.
How did Christianity spread? By evangelization. It was not spread by the sword. So there are two very different religions here. One that uses violence to expand, and another in which the founder is willing to give himself up to death to redeem his people. These are opposite views of the world. It isn't just all the religions of the world are basically after the same thing. They're not.
But Father, this begs the question, we should do a whole episode on this topic. But we opened with the Pope saying, "Look, I'm going to expand access to the church and leadership roles," or maybe we're doing it later. On the Pope saying he's going to open up leadership roles to women in the church. We see this kind of synodal talk. This is a marked departure from the church militant, a church that deeply believed that their family and community rested upon this bedrock of faith. And if that faith was disturbed, everything else was disturbed, including the natural order. When you see Islam, I remember being in Egypt, and my driver said, "Sir, can I pull over here?" I said, "Sure, pull over." Well, he pulled over because the minaret was sounding. He pulled his carpet out the back, threw it on the floor. Suddenly, thousands of men came into the street, and they all were facing east doing their prayers in the evening. And I thought, here's a male-led, robust, deeply believing faith making a public witness that Catholicism and everybody else apologizes for or puts in, wants to confine to the walls of the church. That's not Islam's way. And there has to be a spiritual response to that in some way.
No, there has to be. And what you just spoke of is an illustration that in Islam, there's no difference between sacred and profane. We have that very clear distinction because government is, Jesus said, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, give to God what belongs to God. And therefore, you have space dedicated to God, space dedicated to Caesar. For Islam, it's all encompassing. God rules everybody, including every Christian. They just don't recognize it. through Islam. And that's the kind of point. And Bob wrote about this in the book he just put out. I mean, what a sad story. Remember those Coptic Christians in Libya who were brought on the beach in orange suits? They were given a choice. Apostatize from Christianity, believe in Islam, or die. Now, what religion does that? It's a religion in which the people who are, enthusiastic about it think God is pleased when we conquer people. And Christianity is the other way around. We say God has sent a mission into the world to convince people to follow us, and through His grace that happens. So, we need a spirit, of course, of cooperation and love toward those we don't agree with. But we have to also affirm, by me stating that Jesus Christ is the unique Savior of all mankind, I'm not offending anybody because I'm telling them a truth. If they don't recognize it, then perhaps they will think about it when they hear me say it. But I'm not going to say Jesus only came to save the Christians and then Islam is a different dispensation and that's God wills that. No, we don't believe that.
I want to talk about the return to the traditional Latin Mass, which we saw at St. Peter's Basilica recently in Rome. Cardinal Raymond Burke celebrated the Mass with the Pope's approval, thousands packed into the Basilica. But that same weekend, the Pope celebrated Mass for these synodal groups that we've been talking about, and he said the following: Christians must live with confidence and a new spirit, and the tensions that run through the life of the Church between unity and diversity, tradition and novelty, authority and participation. We must allow the Spirit to transform them so that they do not become ideological contrapositions and harmful polarizations. Bob, does this give us any insight into how the Pope sees not only the Church in this moment, but this bend toward tradition?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I wish I could go over to the Angelicum and read his doctoral dissertation, because he wrote specifically on the role of a person in authority within the Augustinian order. So he probably has ideas going back quite a way. I mean, look, it's good to talk about this, about not letting these different positions become polarized and ideological. But who does this? Father and I were talking in the green room, so to speak, about Cardinal Mueller. I mean, Cardinal Mueller, in that beautiful interview you did with him, Raymond, where he talks about how these people are exclusivist in their theologies. I mean, you can be an advocate of the traditional Latin Mass and say, well, that's for me. Some other people would like the Novus Ordo Mass. I mean, I go to the Novus Ordo Mass usually, and in my parish, it's a beautiful Mass, and I get a lot out of it. But there are many different rites in the Church, right? I mean, we keep talking about this. There are four main rites, but there are then other subsidiary rites. And no one says that because there's a Ukrainian Catholic Church that therefore they're creating schism, or they're backward in their theology. The only people who claim this, and the only people they claim it about, are the people who are sort of partisans of the Novus Ordo Mass and opponents of the traditional Latin Mass, as if the Mass that was said for 1960 somehow years somehow is a deep and dangerous aberration. Well, who's the ideologue in that circumstance? It's not the people who are kind of part of a tradition that maybe isn't to everyone's taste. It's the people who want to banish Catholics and shut down the way that they feel that they best worship.
Yeah. Father, this seems to be an ongoing narrative, and it's the reason I'm very watchful of it. And it's the narrative that Pope Francis, I think, advanced first, that there's an ideology at play, a partisanship. What did the Pope Leo call it there? The hardened polarizations in the Church. The question is this. I had dinner with a man the other night who, by the way, was a Latin adherent. He went to the Latin Mass on occasion. And he said, but in those Latin communities, some of them have some bad ideas about the Pope and authority in the Church. I said, stop. Are you now Padre Pio searching the hearts of everybody going to the Latin Mass? Do you do that for the people going to the Novus Ordo Mass? They've got wacky ideas too. I mean, so it's a narrative that I think is very destructive when you see young people, some of the young people I saw in Texas this past week, who are yearning for this tradition. They want the ancient and the eternal and the true. And as they move toward it, they're being told, no, you're part of polarization and a hardened ideology.
Yeah, I mean, Why is it in the face of success getting people into church, the first reaction is take away the key and shut the door because these people are promoting something that causes division in the church? No, the people shutting the door of the parish are causing division because they're driving people out of their church. Now, what is behind this? Bob and I were talking in the green room, as he mentioned, and it's hard to figure out. I think it goes largely back to a 1960s attitude that after Vatican II, everything that came before is not subject to revision and suspicion. Everything that came later is a project for the good. And therefore, the new Mass is inviolable, meaning you can't go back to the old Mass. Well, guess what? A whole series of people in practice reject that notion because it basically marginalizes Christian history, as Bob said. About 1960, was every form of worship before Vatican II somehow defective and needing to be reformed? The answer is, of course not.
Yeah.
Now, over the course of history, additions are made, things are changed. I've studied this myself. A whole series of prayers were changed at the time of the Council of Trent. But when people say, I find the beauty of the old missal to nourish my spiritual life, the first thing we shouldn't turn around and say to them, you are a polarizing ideologue and you need to change your mind. You need a new attitude. You need a formation. This is the message that is being conveyed when synodality has a closed door to the Latin Mass community. I would love if they said, we're going to have a synodal session and listen to people like the Latin Mass. Believe me, I could fill that room with people I personally know, and you guys too. And that would be a beautiful thing, because they would find a bunch of people actually believe in all of Catholic doctrine. Why is it that synodality is dominated in Germany, for instance, by people who don't believe in Catholic doctrine and constantly criticizing it? Because it's self-selected. These people pick the ones they want to have at the table. So we have to get back to, if we're going to have discussion groups in the church, let's say everybody's welcome and really mean it.
Yeah. I'm going to talk about the synodal way in Italy in a moment, but I got to get to this very quickly. I want both of your reactions. First, you, Father. Chicago Archbishop Blaise Cupich said recently about the traditional Latin Mass, quote, it is more of a spectacle rather than the active participation of all the baptized. Your reaction, Father?
I don't agree with him. Spectacle? A sacred action is not a spectacle. A spectacle is what happens on Broadway or, somewhere out in the hustings where you have, Oklahoma's being produced at my high school. That's a spectacle. And I love spectacles. The Holy Mass is not a spectacle. No. And by the way, the meaning of participation is a great debate. If I'm silently listening to the priest pray something, even in a low voice, am I not participating? I certainly am, because my intention is what counts. And if the church has mystery, the Eastern rites all have iconography. You can't even see when the priest is doing the consecration. They close the doors. Right. This is a false notion of participation. It's sort of like the banjo theory here. Until all the banjo players are on the stage, the show can't start. No. Some people play banjo, others listen. That's the way it is.
Bob, a spectacle, if you want to talk about spectacle, look at that clip we played earlier from Paul VI Hall. That's what a spectacle looks like, and they'd never call that a spectacle. But, Bob, the idea that somehow the people attending the Latin Mass aren't really participating, give me a break. They wouldn't be packed the way they are, and the young wouldn't be coming if there wasn't something drawing them and something they felt they were gathering from it and taking from it, the reality of the Eucharist and Christ himself.
Yeah, I'm with Father. There are very different ways of participating. Some of them are a little louder. If you go to Africa, it might be a pretty exuberant kind of celebration of the Mass. Some of them can be more formal. And in fact, if we look back at the documents of Vatican II, what they seem to be pointing about by talking about greater participation was educating the laity to take part in the music and the recitation of the prayers in Latin and whatnot, not necessarily an entirely vernacular approach to things. But I looked at the pictures of those young people, and you go online and you look at the lines all the way down Via della Conciliazione, which is that big wide avenue that goes right down to St. Peter's. It was filled. The square was filled. The way that people were reverent inside the basilica itself. Boy, that's a different kind of participation, and we don't want to lose that from the
Yeah.
one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church.
Well, that's vibrant with tradition, vibrant with the eternal truths. Why wouldn't you want that lived reality? And compare that, and I don't mean to compare and contrast, but maybe I do. Compare that to the kind of sterile, academic, deadly round table groups that look like, the retirement homes bingo. I mean, there's no comparison. There's just no comparison. There was a third synodal gathering that I mentioned a moment ago in Italy, and it produced a document, Father, called Leaven of Peace and Hope. And it calls for women to have co-responsibility in decision-making and encourages local churches to promote the recognition of, and quote, the pastoral accompaniment of homosexual and transgendered persons, end quote. What is meant by, first of all, the co-responsibility of decision-making, Father?
Now, here we go again. This is an attack on Catholic doctrine. Catholic doctrine teaches that the shepherds of the church are the governors. They're the people who exercise governance. They can associate with themselves advisors, but they can't surrender the power of governance. And this is the demand, that women have to have power of governance because otherwise they're being treated unfairly. If that's the case, then Jesus was unfair. That, of course, is false. Jesus is God. Everything he did is good. The acceptance of transgender people, so now the Italian bishops and the church in Italy believes that there's such a thing as a transgender person, that God made a man in the body of a woman and vice versa. This is mythology. I mean, isn't that mythology the cause of tremendous suffering because some parents bring their children in for mutilation? They tell children to dress and act like they're opposite sex. I mean, this is manipulative. It's all about the sexual revolution. It's disordered thinking. It's societal chaos. And the Italian hierarchy is saying, we want part of that. We want to get into that action. This is horrific. The Pope needs to stop. We have to have a decree from Rome saying there is no such thing as a transgender person, as a bisexual person. You are a heterosexual. There are men, there are women. That's it.
Bob, this idea of women filling in and taking decision-making positions that the Italian bishops are pushing, it sounds like they're pushing female ordination. JP2 in 1994, I thought, in Ordinatio Sacerdotalis, closed the door to this. I thought, in 1994.
Yeah, and many before and after him, too.
Yeah.
Look, both of these things, I've said this before, but both of these things proceed along a certain path, it seems to me, because if you talk to people who know about public relations, they will tell you that what is said and what gets communicated are often quite different things. So, in Fiducia Supplicans, Pope Francis and Cardinal Fernandez tried to make it appear that all they're trying to do is bless people who are engaged in homosexual acts and hoping to make them more faithful to the church. But what the world heard was it was an affirmation of people who are same-sex attracted and are sexually active. The same thing I think is true of this, putting women into positions simply because they're women. I said earlier, we really want the best people for any particular job, whoever that happens to be. And the message that goes out when I think that this is a ditzy document to come out of the Italian bishops. I'm deeply, deeply disturbed that they would go along with this political movement that's now taken over, where you're going to say that you're going to appoint women on the basis of the fact that they are women. What this communicates yet again is that what the church was in the past was somehow wrong in restricting ordination to men. That we are the ones who know better than the entire past history of the Roman Catholic Church. It looks like it's humble and it's open, and in fact it's arrogant and it's ideological.
Father, to Jesuit superiors, Pope Leo said something that I found revealing that may cast light on our entire discussion. He said the following: when the Spirit leads the apostolic body elsewhere for a greater good, this may require letting go of long-cherished structures or roles and exercise of Ignatian holy indifference. What does that mean to you, Father? What is happening there?
Well, they're talking about changing practices and institutions from the past, saying that the Holy Spirit is leading the church to do that, meaning, therefore, this is a decision God is revealing to the church. How do we know that it's the Holy Spirit, not another spirit, spirit of the age, for instance? And then Ignatian indifference, that's part of it, in the Jesuit order. If the superior orders you to leave one apostle, go to the other, you're given like 10 minutes to be upset, and then you have to accept it, in a spirit of indifference, which is a good thing. But we have to, if there's a threat to something in the life of the church that the church has always done and taught, we don't need indifference. We need defense of the faith. So, it's in the context of what we're speaking of, and that's where this is all being said. We have a movement for the ordination of women to the priesthood, and they want to start with the diaconate, but then they want the priesthood. No, are we to simply say, in general terms, structures and practice from the past may have to be cast aside because the Holy Spirit wants it? No, we don't have to say that at all, and we're not being obstructionist or anti-Christian. We're actually being faithful to the dogma.
Bob, it does put the faithful in a tough spot because, when you're the Pope saying, look, you may have to let these structures go and just accept it with holy indifference. When that's the Mass, long cherished moral teaching, not long cherished, long fought for, and the tradition of the Church for 2,000 years, we're just going to suddenly allow that to capsize and say, oh, well, okay.
Yeah, and people died for that faith
Right.
in that Mass as well. I wish Leo meant that the Jesuits should abandon some of the things that they have cherished for the last several decades, but I'm afraid that's not what he intended in these remarks, because certainly the Jesuits need some kind of shot in the arm in Reformation themselves. There's nothing wrong with adapting to new circumstances and doing better at it, but there's a kind of a progressive ideology that's in this. That when you hear people say, and some of the most fervent followers of the synodal way talk about, we're not going back.
Right.
Well, we're not going back to what? The world is not only what progressives or leftists say it is, and the future is going to be what. We are human beings that are always human in pretty much the same way. We're fallen, we're sinful. Sometimes we're capable of great glories, great creations, love, etc. So to go back is just to say that we want to be fully human. And there may be times in the past that can help us do that. There may be times in the future where we discover some new things. But there's an ideologization of this narrative as well, too, that somehow letting go always means letting go and moving in a particular direction rather than into that fuller understanding. This is where someone has written recently that Leo is still using the same writer's team that Francis did. And I hope that after he's not as busy with these Jubilee events, as we get into next year and he gets toward the end of his first year of his papacy, he can turn away from all this activity that he's been engaged in. And he's engaged in a lot. There's a lot going on even in Rome today.
Endlessly. And
then he can really begin to look, I hope, and become his own man and to try to get a team together that's going to put out a strong message and one that will appeal and try to unify people, but it's got to be something different than we've had in the past. Clearly, the Francis years were not years of unity, and I think a wise leader, and I believe that Leo could be that or could become that, would have to look back at those years and say, okay, there were certain things that he tried to do that were good, they didn't work.
Yeah. Okay. Well, when you said the people in the synodal way say we're not going back, my answer would be we don't have to go back because what we have is eternal. You're fine. Father, very quickly, the question we posed at the top, is Pope Leo Francis 2.0?
There are many similarities in the content of what has been said, and there are similarities in the continued endorsement of the synodal way in the church, and synodality, I should say, that whole thing. There are divergences because Pope Leo he's very calm, his personality is to listen, he's gracious, and Pope Francis was known to be abrasive to people, and that, that's just the way he was. I'm not inventing that. So it remains to be seen if this is going to be a full-fledged continuation of what Pope Francis started, or if there'll be modifications. Right now, it's too hard to tell, but I would say this. The script writers are obviously the same, because the language I'm reading today, my memory bank's going, wait a minute, I think I heard that 7 or 8 years ago.
Bob, is Leo Francis 2.0? I'll give you the final word.
Oh, the final word. I am so blessed. I'm going to take up an agnostic position too, because obviously we're all kind of wrestling with this. But he's a different kind of animal. And, one of the things that I think I admired a great deal about Pope Benedict is that he recognized that people in the church should not be subject to these sudden discontinuities. One of the reasons why he wanted to bring the two different forms of the Western Rite into this fruitful conversation with one another is that there was this kind of just break with the old Latin Mass, and you just jumped out into something new. So I'm not entirely surprised that he wants to keep a certain continuity with Francis. He clearly has some affection for Francis. But if he is going to be a good pope, if he's going to be the leader that I think Christ has called him to be in our time, he's also going to have to be a different pope. And how he embraces that is going to be quite interesting to see.
It's a great way to end this. I'm not going to absolve myself from having to answer the question. So is Pope Leo Francis 2.0? My answer is simply, I hope not. Posse, we are grateful to you all, as always. If you want more of the Arroyo Grande Prayerful Posse, subscribe to the Arroyo Grande Show on YouTube or our Arroyo Grande podcast channel, wherever you get yours. On behalf of Robert Royal, Father Gerald Murray, until the posse rides again, stay the course, follow the light. I'm Raymond Arroyo. We'll see you next time. Arroyo Grande is produced in partnership with DP Studios and iHeart Podcast, and it's available on the iHeart Radio app or wherever you get your podcasts.